podcast starts.
Hello everyone, if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome, and if you're a returning listener, welcome back, and thanks for sticking with us. This show talks about horror in film, TV, other media, other items which we think of as adjacent to horror, and sometimes other things from our lives which we'd like to talk about just because that's who we are. This week we're going to be talking about the film, TV, and general media franchise that is the wonderful What We Do in the Shadows. We have a number of hosts to vary week to week, but I'm TD Velasquez and you can call me Dan. I'm in Greater Manchester and today I have the pleasure of being joined by...
Stella in Manchester.
And coming back to the podcast after a week away, welcome back, it is...
Kirsty Warrow in Shropshire.
It's wonderful to have you back,
Thank
Kirsty.
you.
Hello.
Can I make a request, Dan, that you, after... You know, kind of introduce the focus of the episode, that you cut in the theme tune.
Oh, right. Well, the listener now knows.
Yes.
If
that worked or not as a request.
So, yeah. So I'll leave you in suspense, but the listener knows. It's a great theme tune, though, isn't it?
It's so good, yeah.
And it's a great theme tune when I watched it on the film, and I get a very silly thrill from just watching the TV show and going, oh, they've kept the same theme tune, you know, which, you know, the Fargo show didn't do that. What have we got in the way of news this week?
Well, I've only got two pieces of life news. One, I've still got a job. Yay!
That's wonderful news. That's what we like to hear.
And the second piece of life news, it's my birthday tomorrow.
Oh, happy early birthday,
fantastic.
or happy belated birthday by the time this goes out.
Yeah,
Obviously.
true. It was my birthday the other day.
Yes, everybody send Stella late tweets, delayed 1 day late tweets saying, hope you had a good birthday.
I did. I'm sure I will. What?
Oh, that's marvellous. Well, I've got a little bit of horror news. My last bit of news, I think, on the show was slightly sad because it was about somebody who died, and this one is also the same. The actor Ben Cross died overnight. And he's not an actor who's associated mainly with horror, but he does fall into that category of British actors who appeared in a horror film in the period roughly through the 80s and through the 90s when we made very, very few horror films. And he was in Paper House, which was Bernard Rose's first film, and is a wonderful... I mean, you could argue it's not a horror film, but it's a very scary children's movie about the dreamscape of this young girl, and he plays her father in it, and she basically she tries to draw him, and her drawings come to life in her dreams, and because she's not an amazing artist, she makes him look scary, and he appears in her dreamscapes as a kind of terrifying stalking figure then. It's kind of a wonderful movie. I haven't seen it for a long time. It has a lovely musical score on it by Stanley Myers and Hans Zimmer. It's one of Hans Zimmer's first movie scores. Yeah, I can't really think of another connection to horror that Ben Cross has, but I did just want to mention that obviously he's mainly known for things like Chariots of Fire.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, what was the thing where he played Prince Charles? I can't remember. He's got that kind of regal bearing that you always associate those kind of roles, and he's fantastic. So I just wanted to give a shout out to him. He died very suddenly. Apparently, he'd been somewhat ill for a little while, but nobody really expected him to pass. So that's very sad. But we remember him well, and he leaves behind a really nice body of work. So thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Kirsty, have you got any news apart from the fact that you've had a wonderful
Wow,
holiday?
I did not see Loch Ness Monster, although my daughter claims to.
Oh.
have seen
Oh,
it.
right.
Although I rather suspect she's making it up. No, so what's interesting is on Twitter this morning, I was alerted to a possibility because Mark Mode put out a tweet. I mean, I wonder if either of you know what Mark Mode's favourite movie is.
Is it The Wicker Man?
I do. Well, you're in the right year.
Yeah.
Do you not know, Stella? Really?
No, sorry. Oh.
I'll give you a clue. When it was re-released to British cinemas in 1998, Kermode's name was all over the posters.
Oh, The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, right.
So he put out this tweet this morning, which I read it and I thought, oh, Stella will approve of this tweet. So this is what Mark Mode said this morning on Twitter. I had lots of worried/outraged tweets alerting me to rumours of an Exorcist remake/reboot. Honestly, I doubt it will happen. But if it does, so what? Nothing can touch or tarnish the original. There have been so many imitators. What harm can another one will do? All will be well. So.
You see? Good man.
So I went looking and I found an article on /film which cites the end of a recent Deadline article as the sort of source for this rumour, that they've sort of said that their slate of films, current Morgan Creek projects include Stay Tuned at AMC with a planned theatrical reboot of The Exorcist in the works for 2021.
Right.
Well,
so
bring it, I say.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, although
can't do any harm.
Although in 2015 they did tweet this: for the record, we will never attempt to remake The Exorcist. So,
Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
bollocks, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And also,
the
the article points out that the Morgan Creek have been, kind of bought out, rebranded in the meantime.
Right.
So So details seem to be a little bit vague on that one, but obviously, kind of it's such a seminal horror work that I thought it worth mentioning.
Well, I think,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they probably could do it because they did the serialization
Yeah.
TV.
Was that produced by Morgan Creek? Do you know, Stella?
I'm not
obviously
sure
they
about
control
that,
the
but it
role.
had some other connections to the film. I'm not sure what they are. I can check that out. But that was well received, and it was quite good actually. And that was supposed to be a direct sequel to the first film.
Oh, was it? I
Yeah.
assumed it was a remake of the book, the story of the first film.
No, it's set afterwards. So, what's she called? Reagan. She's well, this might be a spoiler. Oh, bugger it. She
For the series or the film?
for
Spoilers for the film are okay.
for the series. Basically,
Okay.
she's in it
Right.
as that character.
An older version of.
Yeah.
So Linda
Yeah.
Blair's
Okay.
in that as Reagan.
Yeah, I think it's Linda Blair as
Okay.
well.
Oh, really?
I mean, don't quote me on that, but certainly the
Okay, I'm
character
gonna
Reagan
now
is in
go
it.
and look now because I need to know that answer in my life.
And our listeners will be screaming if they do know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
hold
do
on.
Sorry.
not know.
But it's
I
good,
didn't
you know,
know
it was
it
well
was a
received.
continuation. I thought it was a straight remake. I remember thinking that they were probably going to do that. When I read the book of The Exorcist in the 90s, and I also read Legion, the sequel, which was later filmed as The Exorcist 3.
Yeah.
I just thought, they could make a big mini-series out of this. I mean, for a movie adaptation of a book, the film does get quite a lot of the book in. But, you could still spin it out for longer and do so.
Yeah.
And there's been a stage play version, hasn't there?
Yeah.
Has there?
It
Oh,
doesn't.
that sounds
It
good.
looks like she was not in the.
It's not Linda Blair. It's just the character.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
character.
Oh, that would have been
Yeah.
Well,
nice.
to be
wouldn't it?
fair, but, she was a little kid.
Yes.
You can get anyone to say that
Oh, no,
I
that's
was
true,
that
that's
little
true,
kid
that's
years
true.
ago.
Yeah,
It's like, I loved, do you know the detail that in Doctor Sleep last year, obviously Ewan McGregor plays the grown-up version of Danny Lloyd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because they're obviously aware that, look, Danny Lloyd's probably not acted since The Shining.
Yeah. Let's get somebody who
But-
can.
But they did want to kind of show respect to Danny Lloyd's legacy, so he is in the film,
Yeah.
Right.
playing a different character, playing a minor character.
Okay.
So
Still not
Yeah.
seen that.
So I've got another thing to say, but it's not news. I just wanted to sort of squee a little bit and to not include it as part of the recommendations at the end. So the first episode of Lovecraft Country has gone out this week.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know if either of you seen it.
No,
no.
it's not on any of the things that
Yeah,
I pay
it's
for.
I think it'll probably be making its way to Now TV because it's Sky Atlantic, and
Yeah.
so so one of the lovely things was it was I think it's a Monday night airing, and actually I think we were talking about, weren't we, about whether or not the HBO were doing horror. Stella, if you remember when we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I'd forgotten about it. Did you see The Outsider?
No.
No, so The Outsider I think was HBO as well. And it was the adaptation of Stephen King.
Yeah.
With Jason Bateman. What's his name? The guy who was in Rogue One, and I've forgotten his name now. I feel really bad. Australian
narrow
actor.
down.
He was played the bad guy in Rogue One.
Bad guy. Ben Mendelsohn.
That's him, and he's brilliant in it.
Is he Emo Vader?
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Sorry, no, he's not
Oh.
Emo Vader. So that's the other. Yeah,
The other
Rogue
bad
One
guy.
sort of is before, and
Ben
then
Mendelsohn's he's the not bad guy in Captain Marvel.
Yes.
The guy who you think he's
Oh.
evil,
Yeah,
turns out
but
to be
yeah.
good.
But he's great, and he's
Gotcha.
really great in The Outsider, which I think was also HBO. Anyway, Lovecraft Country, really impressive first episode. Very, without spoiling it too much, if you're familiar with Lovecraft at all, it's very Lovecraftian. It does this weird thing of it's not an adaptation of the works, but it's set in a universe where Lovecraft is an author, and people believe in some of the things that he wrote about, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
Okay.
we talked about before about does this thing about kind of placing emphasis on African American characters in in Jim Crow era US, and again, if you know anything about Lovecraft, that his kind of
His
attitude,
racial
politics were really
great.
problematic.
Yeah.
And the what's lovely is that the TV show addresses that immediately, and uses the kind of first episode to have what I thought was a kind of quite a smart kind of discussion about that separation of works from the author. So if you haven't seen it and you get the opportunity, I would strongly recommend it. Both Sven and I kind of got to the end of the first episode, and just because they're just releasing it weekly rather than the whole season at once, we were both simultaneously annoyed that there wasn't more immediately, but also kind of grateful
sign.
because you get to digest it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So yes, we're very excited for the next episode. So
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So, just a little tidbit of news that just crossed my brain. I remember seeing it somewhere. I think it's been confirmed now that Courtney Cox is going to be in the new Scream film.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I didn't imagine that. So I think that's the whole gang back together, isn't it?
With a better haircut, we can hope.
In fact, I think I found out that she was in that because there was an article about her haircuts.
That's what I saw as well.
But terrible haircut in one of the films.
Yeah.
I can't remember which one, but yeah.
It's the third one. It's
Oh.
Scream
Is it
3. The bangs,
Short,
I suppose, 'cause it's
yeah.
American. Yeah, it's
Short
like
range.
No. Looks like she
Wow.
did it whilst drunk.
The year 2000.
Yeah.
Gosh. Oh, that's great news. Random thought. I also got round to watching Knives Out, which was one of your recommendations a few weeks ago, Kirsty, and that's great. I mean, obviously, it's not at all horror adjacent. It's a lovely little murder mystery. It's a murder mystery, but it's not particularly violent or anything. You can watch it with your grandma or whatever. It's for fun for all the family, but it does have Jamie Lee Curtis in a great role, and also Christopher Plummer has a fair amount of horror credentials.
Yeah.
He was Van Helsing. In a terrible film, but he was Van Helsing.
Yeah.
And
we have Toni Collette as well.
And Toni Collette
yeah.
from Hereditary, who's also great. And yeah, it's marvelous fun. And I was, I did find it that it effectively spun my expectations.
Yes.
It's a really nice take on the murder mystery,
Yeah.
the kind of traditional,
I quite enjoyed
old-fashioned murder mystery.
I have to say, I quite enjoyed the way that this is a film that is the second film to bring Daniel Craig and Christopher Plummer together, where Daniel Craig is an outside investigator to the murder of a member of a prominent and very rich family by the patriarch of the family, played by Christopher Plummer.
Oh, okay. What was the other film?
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, David Fincher's
Of
version.
course.
Yeah. They're very different films, though. Obviously, very different.
Wow. So, on that, on the not so horrific note of talking about Knives Out and the more horrific note of Dragon Tattoo, let's segue into our discussion for this week. And if you haven't heard the theme tune already in this episode, then I'll certainly put something in now. Da-da! My first thought is to say thank you very much to both of you, because if you'd not enthusiastically gone on about what we do in the shadows on this show several weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have watched it. But now I have, and within moments of starting watching it, I just imbibed the whole thing. So for any listeners who've not watched any version of it yet, or don't know what it is, so what we do in the shadows broke through as it's a New Zealand film in 2014 that's a spoof docudrama supposedly about the lives of three vampire flatmates, and it just kind of follows them through the tribulations of their lives, the everyday problems of just being a vampire in the modern world, and it's very charmingly done. And having watched the film, the film is written and directed by and stars Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi, and I just found it worked so well. And I did watch the TV show with a certain amount of trepidation, because I just thought, this will be another. The TV show is created by Jermaine Clement, and it's the same idea, but it's a different cast of vampires set in a different place. It's in New York. But the basic format is the same, and I was worried that would this just be kind of pale imitation, even though the actors playing the vampires in it, Kevin Novak, Matt Berry, Natasha Demetrio, the fourth actor, Mark Broch, I didn't know his work beforehand, but certainly those three I was already a fan of. But I was a bit worried, but those fears soon kind of disappeared, and then I found that I'd, in a blink of an eye, had watched a season and a half of it, in a desperate attempt to stave off ending the show. I went back and found the 2005 short film, which the 2014 film was based upon, and you can find it on YouTube, which is also written and directed by and starring the same cast as the movie.
Can I just interrupt? Because the
Go on.
original short film is called What We Do in the Shadow, Interviews with Some Vampires.
Oh, yes. It's fantastic. Obviously, it's not anywhere near as polished as the later productions, but you can kind of see the roots in there, and it was especially nice because the characters some of the characters have different names, behave differently, even though they're played by the same actors. But it's interesting to see. But then I went back and I finished off watching the whole series, and now in somewhat despair that there won't be another series for some time.
It has been confirmed though there is going to be a series 3, so they have said yes, but they're just it's been slowed down on the process like everything else at the moment. But it is coming,
and it is nominated, isn't it, for the Emmy in?
They've got loads of nominations.
Yeah.
I had a look at the list for the costumes and for special effects and writing, and then outstanding comedy series.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa.
I think the feeling is that it's not likely necessarily to win outstanding comedy because of some of the other nominees in that category. But it says a lot about the way in which it has sort of been received more broadly that it's been nominated at all.
Yeah.
So let's have a talk about why we think it's so wonderful, because I think it's fairly clear that all three of us think it's absolutely wonderful. Kirsty, do you want to go first?
Yes, I do.
What's the first thing on your mind?
I think what I'd like to start off is that this film and indeed the franchise is always going to be, I feel like, my cup of tea. Because I love vampires of all types. I honestly do not give a crap if they are scary as hell, if they are, kind of black and white, or even if they're sparkly. I don't care. I don't care. Any ilk of vampire. And certainly kind of my, I think that's probably because my route into liking horror sort of comes from kind of popular Gothic literature. When I was a teenager reading Dracula, and then later the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. And others, so Southern Vampires, etc., all of that stuff, definitely, and Twilight. I don't care. So, kind of, I'm really familiar with vampire archetypes, and one of the things that I loved about this film immediately was just that it was really, the films particularly, and then I think that the TV show develops that, is just its awareness of its place in this kind of cinematic and cultural pantheon of different types of vampires. And if you're familiar with those things, then it's just a lot more fun and a lot more funny. So
it's very literate when it comes to its portrayal of vampirism. I mean, I think one of my favourite things in both the film and the show is they play with the kind of mythical idea that vampires can't enter a building unless they're invited.
Yes.
So therefore,
or even nightclubs.
This boils down to basically they can't go to the pub, except in the film, and they don't do this in the series, which I think is kind of a shame. But in the film, there's one bar that all the vampires go to, where the doormen know that the clientele are vampires, so they know to invite them in all the time. and it's a really sad little bar, and they're all just kind of sitting in these little booths. I mean, there are sequences in the TV show where they go to vampire nightclubs and things, but they always look a little bit more. They have a grandeur to them, or a kind
a
of
bit more trendy.
goth cheekiness. Whereas the one in New Zealand was just so sad.
Like proper old man pub, but with miserable vampires.
I thought that was fantastic. And there's bits like in the TV series things. One of my favourite moments is when the character of Nadja is in a way that is clearly a play on something that's come up in numerous vampire texts from like I think it might have been introduced in there's a 1970s version of Dracula with Jack Palance where he's looking for the reincarnation of his lost love, and that was later picked up and incorporated into Bram Stoker's Dracula. I wonder if it comes from that some vampire production actually nicked that because it's actually a plot element of The Mummy, the original kind of 1930s Universal Mummy. But anyway, so it's quite common in Dracula texts. So Nadja has this lover who keeps being reincarnated, and in this version, in the modern day, he's a bloke called Jeff who works in a multi-story car park, and she goes to see him one night, and she just can't get in. She can't get into an open car park without being invited. So there's just this sequence where she's kind of hovering, because they do the hovering of vampires, and the fact that they can easily fly and stuff, they do that really well. Just the casualness of them suddenly hovering a bit or flying somewhere, and she's basically hovering and keeps trying to go into this car park and bouncing off like an invisible barrier, and it's so hilariously pathetic.
It's got proper belly laughs all the way through, hasn't it? I think so. I found the film because I had a couple of friends of mine, friend Sandy and our mate, we've nicknamed Viking because he looks like a Viking. He's actually called Andy. They were like, have you seen What We Do in the Shadows? Have you seen What We Do in the Shadows? And they went on and on at me for years, and I kept going, no, I've not seen it. And eventually it gave it to me on a flash drive. Is that, here, watch this. I was like, right, fine, watch this. And I didn't watch it for ages. It sat on the shelf for ages, and I eventually watched it, and me and Owen watched it. And we were both just howling, laughing, thought it was great. And same with the series. Obviously, love the series, but I'm sure I've said on here before that my husband doesn't like horror, but he loves What We Do in the Shadows. Completely gets it, gets enough of the references. I think he's seen enough vampire films to understand it, and I think you don't necessarily need to be a horror fan to watch it, and I think they've trodden that board quite well. And I guess also there's lots of the vampire lore that people just know, because it's in popular culture. You know, you don't need to be a horror fan to know about sunlight and garlic and coffins and stuff. And then they just riff on all of that so much. It's just glorious. And belly laughs every episode.
I mean, in a way, it's a strange thing that vampires are, horror monsters, but they're also effective children's characters. There's the Count from Sesame Street,
Duckula,
and and all those things rely on you knowing that vampires drink blood and do horrific things. Duckula is a vegetarian, but in the function of the series, that's what makes him unusual. There are proper scary vampires in that world.
Can I just
it handles all that stuff wonderfully. Kirsty,
I just want to just kind of walk us through just the first scene of the movie, because I just think that so effectively sort of sets up kind of what the film is and its tone. So if you remember, the movie opens with the camera crew going into Viago, which is the Taika Waititi character, who is he's the Interview the Vampire sort of sensitive, Georgian
so
dandy.
Nice and
he's
sweet.
So lovely. Yeah, so it's him kind of waking up, and he comes up out of his coffin, and that kind of Nosferatu raising on a board out of his coffin, but it gets stuck halfway.
Right.
So that's a kind of moment of not being quite as slick and as sexy as, and he's smiling awkwardly when he does that. And then there's just the checking that it's actually dark outside. And then it's his job to sort of go around and wake up the other occupants of the house, which at that point are we see him go to wake up Peter, who is the kind of Nosferatu
The
Count
terrifying-
Orlok, you know,
Yeah, he's the Orlok
silent,
character, isn't he?
which is beautiful, silent, bald, bat-like. Character who we understand is the oldest vampire, which of course fits because cinematically, culturally, he's the oldest. And then we go to I'm not sure if this is getting the order right, but then it's Vladislav the poker.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he's Jermaine Clement.
Yes.
Doing his best, Gary Oldman
Yes.
in Bram Stoker.
And then
Dracula.
again, there's a real clear reference,
Impression.
isn't there, to Bram Stoker's Dracula as Fiago opens the door, and we sort of see on it looks like the far wall, the kind of projected kind of vampire Brides of Dracula orgy.
Oh yeah.
And then I'm not sure if he wakes up Deacon, but we meet Deacon, and Deacon is the kind of Lost Boys, you know, kind of 80s leather vampire, but who thinks he's a really bad boy, but isn't. And then one of the things that this film led me to is just sort of an exploration of Taika Waititi, in particular as a director, his wider body of work. And one of the things that he does in his films is he likes to have these characters who always think they're really cool, but actually aren't. That's kind of one of the main sources of comedy in his, you know, in his worlds. So Deacon in particular, but I think all of the vampires, you know, suffer from this, that they think they're really, really cool. That they are the most dangerous.
Not.
Yeah, but they absolutely are not. And it's the juxtaposition, isn't it, between one of the early scenes is them having a house meeting because Deacon hasn't been doing the washing up.
Yeah, it's the house chores sort of cycle. Yeah.
And you know, I think Deacon's argument is that he's kind of too dangerous and too much of a vampire to do the washing up. Which is just wonderful. So that whole kind of introduction really sort of spells out that it's really it's a clearly really postmodern film in that it's playing with those conventions and those types of characters and putting them in these ridiculous situations. And then, of course,
but it's beautifully, sensitively done as
well.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, the fact they start off with the Taika Waititi character Viago, and he's clumsy and a doofus, but he really cares about the other vampires in the house. You know, he's going around and gently waking them all up.
Yes,
even Peter.
Yeah.
You know, and he's the one who instigates the kind of house meeting, isn't he? And tries to very gently kind of say, you know, guys, we're not pulling our weight here. Everybody's got chores to perform, and I'm so charmed by him instantly. And as the film progresses, his character goes on a kind of love story arc. There's a tragic dimension to him as well. And I just found it so moving because it's so sensitive. Sorry, Kirsty, I feel like I cut you off.
No, I was going to go. Just move on to the kind of the kind of fifth character who gets introduced is Nick, who gets turned into a vampire. Yeah. Nick the vampire, who kind of runs is the again. So it's the trope of the baby vampire and the the kind of bloodlust and all of that kind of stuff, and learning what the rules are, and the way in which they have to kind of police him, and is that Nick's frame of reference is because he's a contemporary vampire, is his frame of reference is Twilight. So he's like, I'm Twilight, and he's told not to tell people that he's a vampire, but he goes around and like going, do you see that dude off Twilight? That's me. Which is so funny.
I was quite surprised, pleasantly so, when I watched the short film, which was made several years before the proper film. But nearly all of those actors are the same. And in fact, there's a great line about Nick that I don't think makes it into the main movie. When the character who is Vladislav in the film, I can't remember, he's called something different in the short film, but it's still Jermaine Clement. And he talks about how vampires generally look much older than they actually are because they're immortal. And he goes, take Nick, for instance. He only looks 25, but he's 26.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah,
It's so
absolutely.
good.
And then, of course, the film also folds in this little moment with the werewolves.
Yes.
We're werewolves, not swearwolves. So the kind of head werewolf is played by Rhys Darby, who is again another. So there's a whole kind of collection of kind of comedians, creative types.
He's a Taika Waititi kind of rep company. Actor,
he is. So he gets this kind of little brilliant cameo as the pack leader of the polite werewolves. So and it's nice to see again how the obviously they don't bring him back in the TV show, but the same kind of idea kind of presents itself again in the TV show.
Yeah, they're a bit.
Well,
the werewolves in the show
has werewolves.
And the werewolves
Go
in
on,
the TV show, they're a bit useless, aren't they? They're just really dumb.
Yeah.
And don't they get them away by throwing them a rubber bone?
Yeah.
To sort of diffuse the situation so they don't end up fighting. Just
Yeah.
like they've got a squeaky toy.
Yeah.
God.
Oh,
Yeah.
dear. So,
Oh, it's just all so good.
I mean, because you talked about the start of the film, though, Kirsty, I think this is a good point for me to mention that one of the reasons I had trepidation going into it, and also I think a reason why I had never watched even the film when because obviously it's been around some years, and I do kind of like the idea of it, but the whole kind of like a vampire flat chest felt to me like it had sort of been done.
Yeah.
I mean, there was that TV show which I used to very much enjoy called Being Human, which was a vampire, a werewolf, and ghost share a flat.
Like house share, wasn't it?
In Bristol.
It's Bristol. It was Cardiff.
Yeah.
Oh, was it filmed in Cardiff?
I think it probably was. Yeah.
Yes, it's BBC Wales,
BBC
isn't it?
Wales.
Yeah. So, that makes sense. But anyway, because of that opening of the film, it instantly sets up that this is a very different take on that kind of idea, and it has a real tone and a sensitivity to it that's evolving in a very different way. But that opening then did lead me into trepidation going into the series, because basically they do it again at the start of the first episode, don't they?
Yeah.
But with a different character, which is the character played by Kevin Novak. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Nandor.
Yeah,
Nandor. Is it Nandor the Relentless?
The Relentless, yeah.
Brilliant. And it seems a little bit secondhand, and I was like, but basically, the TV show only takes an episode and a half to get brilliant. It kind of gets all that second-hand stuff out of the way quite quickly. And there is a shining thing in the first episode, which just made me want to stick with it, even though I was not really sure, which is that the three vampire characters played by Novak and Natasha Dimitriou and Matt Berry all seem like versions of either the characters from the film or characters that they as actors have previously played, so they didn't feel amazingly fresh to me. But then somebody says, but where is Colin Robinson? And my ears pricked up, and in walks this character played by an actor called Mark Proch, who's a very ordinary looking male pattern baldness jumper wearing guy who lives in the house with them, and he holds down a job in an office and can walk around in the daylight and things like this. But it turns out he's an energy vampire, which basically means that he doesn't have any of the generic mythical traits that the other vampires have, but he still drains the life force of other people to survive. It's just that he does it by basically boring them.
We all know those people, don't we? We all know them.
We all know one, at least one.
It's a very, very recognisable character archetype.
I like when he's got when he's hit a really good seam of boredom and his eyes glow.
Yes,
that's his only weird thing. So there's a bit where what's he doing? He's putting a pencil, an electric pencil sharpener, on and off in the office, and everyone around him's getting more and more pissed off with him, and his eyes are just glowing. It's so funny.
He has this wonderfully innocent but also slightly lascivious grin that comes on his
Yeah,
face as well at those points, and that was just that image became my favourite kind of happy thought for a little while.
Yeah.
He's so fantastic, and he was the one thing where I thought, whoa, he does not in any way come from the movie, and he's really good. I understand the actor is from either Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul.
I think it's Breaking Bad.
So
Don't know.
He already has his fans. I haven't seen those shows, but he's just wonderful, and the writing of it and the way his character plays up against the other vampires is so beautifully done. And he obviously, I think he helps those characters because he's giving them something to react to that's different to what was in the movie.
I think as well. Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, he helps. He shows sides to those characters that you haven't seen from Viago and the others in the film, so he helps them to be stronger characters as well. What are you going to say, Kirsty?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about the way in which Colin Robinson is in some ways the sort of surrogate for Peter in the TV show, in that he is the bald-headed guy who lives in the basement.
Well,
and then I was just thinking about the kind of other similarity. Of course, the other character to talk about is Guillermo in the TV series, who is Nandor's familiar, and his kind of his partner in the original film is Jackie.
Yeah, his counterpart.
Yeah, his counterpart in the film is Jackie, who is kind of
Viago's familiar.
Viago, but she's a kind of middle-aged housewife, and they're both kind of doing the familiar thing with the promise of becoming a vampire. But of course with the film is that we've got it's an ensemble cast anyway, so we don't really have a chance to sort of follow anybody's arc too much because it's it's about comedy, isn't it? Whereas the show sets up Guillermo from the first episode as being somebody who's doing this because he wants to become a vampire, and we get the idea that Nandor is not, he's not really thinking about that relationship in those terms. And so out of all of the characters in the television show, Guillermo is set up for the one who has the most potential for character development, character arc, because he has a clear goal, whereas the vampires are just vampires and they need to exist and not be discovered.
They just bumble through their afterlife, don't
whereas
they?
Guillermo,
the way his character develops is wonderfully surprising as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it was so good.
In season 2, the tension, without spoilers, the tension that of his journey is really, really interesting. And I think that, if anything, he is the emotional heart of the show, isn't he? Because it's, you get invested in him and you care that he gets what he wants and that, you don't want to see him suffer, but,
Yeah, they managed to sort of... They pivot it around quite well so that it stops being as much about the four vampires and what they're doing in their vampire-ness and more about, what's going to go on with Guillermo, because how is this relationship going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that Guillermo's not quite, he's not played for laughs in the same way that, like, the vampires are funny and they're doing vampire stuff is funny.
Guillermo's more like a relatable, normal person, isn't he? I mean, he's literally a human.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to relate to anybody, relate to him. Absolutely. So I think that's a really smart decision to kind of anchor the narrative of the television show in a relatable character who has a goal and the capacity to change and barriers to overcome and all that stuff. So,
I mean, I think that a key difference between him and Jackie in the film is that she doesn't live with them.
No.
So she just pops into the narrative at points, and it's always interesting.
Yeah.
But whereas he has got his little room under the stairs
Harry
or wherever
Potter
it is, and he's just stuck with it. And he keeps talking about the fact that he's basically given up 11 years of his life. For Nando so far.
Yeah.
And when are you going to turn me into a vampire? When are you going to turn me into a vampire? And then he keeps meeting other familiars who are often a lot older than him, and they're still waiting.
Yeah, like really old. Yeah,
really old and grey.
His character and the decision to kind of make him Latino character is also kind of interesting because, like, in the first episode, I think he points at a picture of Antonio Banderas, isn't he, in Interview the Vampire?
Oh, yes.
And this is the image that he's got for himself, that so that his relationship to media images of vampires is important in his kind of vision of his aspirational self. But and I was actually part of a couple of What We Do in the Shadows fan groups on Facebook, and I came across a lovely post last night, which was from a fan who has Persian heritage.
Right.
Just saying,
Okay.
you know, does anybody else, you know, kind of come from the same background as me? Because he finds Nandor so, they found Nandor so kind of important and relatable, because often, you know, Persian cultures and characters are not portrayed in the way that Nandor is. You know, not used for comedy, used for, you know, kind of much more stereotypical and often insidious representation.
Yeah.
So he was just saying that, you know, and the fact they have him speak Farsi, and that, you know, is, you know, really important in terms of representation.
The ethnic spread across the characters is really interesting, actually. I mean, you know, you've got Naja as a Greek vampire, which in itself, that's not a stereotype, is it? Can you think of any other Greek vampires? Just that. I mean,
Not off the top of my head.
I'm not sure it says that she is, but the actress is Greek, and she's using that accent, which is, I've never seen Natasha Demetriou acting in anything else, but I've heard her interviews. I've heard she regularly turns up on the Adam Buxton podcast, so I've heard interviews with her a lot over the last couple of years before I ever saw her in anything, and I know stuff about her parents and all this. And basically, the voice of Nadja is her impression of her mum.
Right.
That she just breaks into that voice, and her dad, to be fair, they both sound like that. She just breaks into that accent when she's talking about them, and it's like, I just really appreciate that. The accent is kind of similar enough to the kind of stereotypical Transylvanian Russian accent that it still sounds vampire-y in a way that's recognisable, but it is a different accent. And then, you know, obviously you've got Matt Berry's character is supposed to be English, which he is.
He is, but it's just Matt Berry as a vampire, though, isn't it? Because it's just Matt Berry and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I mean, I think that I love Matt Berry. He's hugely talented, and loads of the things he's done over the years have made me laugh. It's strange. I think this might be the best thing he's ever done, but it's weird that he's not really doing anything different than he's done before.
Yeah.
You know, he's just doing his usual thing, but it's like he's waited 20 years for the right series to fit around him.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, you know, because the characters he plays are so huge.
Yeah.
That usually it's, in a show, it's just him. Surrounded by other characters who seem inconsequential in comparison.
Yeah.
Whereas all the other characters here are so interesting, and the performances are so, kind of perfectly pitched, that he just kind of fits in with it. But he does have a way of just saying anything and making it funny.
I think with him as well, what strikes me is that in anything that I've seen him in, from Mighty Crowd, Mighty Boosh, etc., is that he always sort of feels like I don't want to say he's like an old soul, but his kind of persona is quite archaic. And so the idea that that he fits in into Laszlo so well, because that's the vampire archetype, isn't it? It's kind of, it's
a very good observation.
Yeah, and that part of the hilarity of Laszlo, particularly in there's an episode in season 2, not going to give too much spoilers, is the juxtaposition between that archaic persona and the contemporary America, and that they don't kind of mix.
It's wonderful. Listeners, we will probably get into some spoilers towards the end of the discussion, but we'll flag them up. So if any of you haven't watched the show yet, you're safe at the moment, but we'll give you a shout when we're going to get into anything that will ruin anything. Stella, so you wanted to talk a bit about the fact that this TV show, is made by FX, which is the American network we've discussed previously, because of its willingness to try different things, and it was the network that had the Strain, for instance. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so
you know more than us on this. Yeah.
So basically, the crux of all my research so far has been to look at horror in the conditions or the channel of which it's been made. So I always think it's worthwhile looking at where something has come from and how it's come about to be on that channel and how it fits in that channel, and then therefore sort of the flip side of that is how the conditions and the policies and strategies at a certain TV channel, how that impacts on a horror program, how it allows accordances and spaces for a horror show to be able to do stuff or to not do stuff. So with What We Do in the Shadows, it was obviously come from a very sort of, I guess, cult is the right word, original film. Not many people had heard of it. You know, I was professing myself to be a horror fan and I'd never heard of it until my friends pressed it upon me. So, you know, how does a cult New Zealand film end up on FX in America? So it's worth looking back at how FX came to be in order to understand how that process happened. So I'll try and run through this fairly quickly. So FX is owned by FX Networks, and it's a subsidiary, I always trip over that word, as Fox, of the Fox Entertainment Group, who are owned by 21st Century Fox. Now that's owned by Disney, but when What We Do in the Shadows was greenlit, it was before the Disney takeover, so we can ignore Disney for this sort of period of thought. So when FX launched in 1994, it was in the middle of sort of the cable boom. After the Cable Communications Act was passed and a load of channels arrived. And it was when it started, it was a fully live broadcast coming from an apartment in Manhattan. So it was a bit like, do you remember the Big Breakfast here in the morning? So it was like that. So they had this apartment in Manhattan, and they'd move the cameras between different rooms, and they'd have guests on, and they'd have callers ringing in and stuff, and it was awful, and it was this fully live broadcast for 24 hours a day, and it was like, that's not going to last. And they eventually got rid of it, thank God. But while it was doing that, it was doing lots of other innovative things, and it's the innovation of FX that has always stood out for me as someone who studies American TV drama. So they're the first channel to do interactive TV. They were the early adopter of live viewer email. So in the late 90s, one of the first channels to do that. And it was featuring what, you know, the viewers were saying on their show and tailoring their channel to what the viewers said. Anyway, they got rid of the live apartment, which was good, and they began to focus on classic TV shows. And they relaunched it so it could become more like the other cable channels. So they realised this live business wasn't going to stick. So around the early 2000s, they started to target a male 18 to 49 demographic, and they were rerunning other Fox shows like The X-Files and Buffy. And it's around this point that it starts to get really interesting, and they start making their own original scripted series. And you'll see this time and time again across American TV channels, especially cable channels. Cable used to be seen as the home for reruns. Then when channels start to dip their toe into their originals, then, you know, stuff starts to happen, like with AMC and The Walking Dead. So in 1998, they launched 3 new series. And what's interesting here is they were all cancelled during the first season. So they didn't wait for the season to end. They got a few episodes in and went, nah, strike that, we'll start again. And then they did a Baywatch parody, which was awful. And then they acquired the rights to Ally McBeal, NYPD Blue, and The Practice. And then early 2000s, they start getting into things like they launched The Shield, if anyone remember watching that. Nip Tuck.
Michael Chiklis.
Yeah. Nip Tuck, which was an early Ryan Murphy project, and Rescue Me. And all of these did critically very, very well. So they're clearly taking lots of risks at this point. They're starting series and then they're cancelling them, and they're doing what you'd call edgy dramas, I guess. So around this point, you've got the Parents Television Council, who are this unelected, unofficial body who lobby advertisers and TV channels to stop making interesting content, really. So they were boycotting FX programming due to their graphic and morally perverse content, they said. So obviously good. So basically the Parents Television Council was saying this is morally bad for people to watch. Advertisers shouldn't be advertising on it. At the same time, FX are just like, yeah, whatever, we'll make our own stuff. So they did a comedy called Starved, which is about anorexia. They made It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is amazing if you've never watched that.
I've never seen it, but I'm glad
it's
to hear
fantastic.
That it's great. Danny DeVito, isn't it?
Yeah. So they did Black White, they did Thief, Dirt, The Riches, Damages. So loads of, you know, stuff that people are starting to really get on board with. Then in 2008, this competition from AMC, because they launched Mad Men and then Breaking Bad. FX kicks back and they launch Sons of Anarchy. And then FX it gets even more innovative around this time. It relaunches its website and it starts adding streaming of full episodes rather of its original content. It's one of the first cable channels to do it. In 2008 and 9, FX launches 7 more new shows, 3 of which they cancelled after 1 season. So the main point here is that FX, they're not afraid to boldly go. They're not afraid to try stuff. And this will try anything. You can clearly see in their own horror programming. So as you can see later on, they launch American Horror Story, The Strain. They go through all those things. And because it's a cable channel, it has its own broadcasting standards and practices department. So that means they self-regulate. They can define their own moral, ethical and legal implications of the content that they make. And for the FX broadcasting standards and practices, I think they must feel sometimes as if they're banging their heads against a brick wall because of the content of FX's horror programming. So American Horror Story doesn't shy away. The Strain, as we've mentioned on a previous show, with the parasitic vampires and the worms in the eyeballs advertising that Kirsty loves. So when it came to What We Do in the Shadows, it's picked up by FX. They're making What We Do in the Shadows. FX orders a pilot in the first instance. They don't order a full series, just order a pilot. They make the pilot, they think, right, go for it, and they order the full series. And they tell them you have no limitation on your language or on your violence. So What We Do in the Shadows crew, they go, okay then. So they've got the capacity to be as sweary and as violent as they want, as well as working on the comedy, as well as riffing on all the vampire, codes and conventions that we've talked about. They can be as sweary and as rude as they absolutely want to. And the other thing that marks FX out as a channel that's just so much more interesting than all the other cable channels is the president is called John Landgraf, and I'm sure I've mentioned him before. Yes. And he gets quite involved with all of the original scripted series, and he said to the makers of What We Do in the Shadows, I don't want you to shy away from language, and I don't want you to shy away from the horror violence. And he was saying this is what's going to work for this show. It can't be watered down, even though it's comedy and it's mockumentary. We can't neuter this at all in terms of its horror content. So as well as it's got its gothic and vampire horror aesthetics, it gets to play with that and be funny, which is why it's worked. So, was there anything else that I wanted to say about this in terms of FX? So, one of the ways to get noticed in terms of horror drama, because there's so much of it now on television, and also there's many, many other dramas, John Landgraf said himself, we went through a period of peak TV where there was just so much stuff, is that you need to do something to stand out. And there's been many vampire things on TV before. Buffy, even Dark Shadows back in the 60s, and The Strain, True Blood. There's just loads and loads of vampire things. So What We Do in the Shadows is, it's riffing on all these things, and it's doing it in the mockumentary style and poking fun at the vampire, rather. And that's not really that common to TV horror or to vampires. TV horror and vampires, they've all been quite serious monsters. They're either really gross and monstrous like they are in The Strain, or they're selfish and they're excessive like in American Horror Story, Hotel season, or away from TV, you've got, your romantic sparkly vampires in Twilight. So What We Do in the Shadows is doing an excellent sort of genre hybrid of taking comedy, taking style from sitcoms and mockumentaries, taking the horrific violence and swearing from, maybe something like Breaking Bad, and squishing it all together and creating a product that's not really been seen or done particularly for American television before. And it's worked for them. So they've got, where's my figures? So when it was aired, when it goes out live, it's clocking about 700,000 viewers watching it live, but over its live plus 3 viewings, so in America they count catch-up viewings as well, and it's been pushed up to 3.2 million views per episode, which for a cable drama, that's a lot. That's an awful lot. So their FX are kind of viewing it now as one of their best multi-platform cases or multi-platform things on their slate. And because they've always been innovative in doing that, What We Do in the Shadows is working for them very well. As it's a TV show that's horror. It's a vampire TV show. We've had that before. It's a mockumentary. We've had that before. It's a comedy. We've had that before. But it's all mushed together, and it ticks all their boxes for how television is consumed now, which is generally most people, as you can see with these figures, watch on catch up. So FX have got absolutely no reason to cancel this one. They're going to keep it going. But the conditions, to sum up, the conditions of FX have meant that it's a channel that is not afraid to take risks. They want to do things that are a little bit edgy and a little bit different. They want to stand out, and they want to fit or tick these boxes of multi-platform. And like you said, Kirsty, because they're building a universe with it, with films and TV shows. It's just, I can just see it going a lot further on FX. And John Landgraf, the president, he's very happy with it. He's always whapping away in the press about how much he's happy with it and how well it's doing, and he's really proud of it, and I think so they should be. So that's how it got there.
I think there's that, of course, the Emmy nomination, bless you, comes
Excuse
from broadcasters have to put their own, they have to submit their own potential nominees, don't they? So it's not a kind of case of people, whoever's in charge of the Emmys, the foreign press or whatever it is, they, rather than just going, oh yeah, that one, it's because FX would have gone, actually, here's what we think is actually our strongest kind of content in that way. So, but what I think, going back to Dan's point about the kind of worry about how this very charming and sweet film kind of translates to an American kind of television, not only a kind of continental jump, but also a kind of media platform jump. Part of, I think, what worried me about it was just the way, the kind of comedy that it is. So Taika Waititi, and others as well, Jermaine Clement and Rhys Darby, have always talked about that kind of what the New Zealand sense of humour is, what they call what he's called the kind of comedy of the mundane. So it's just it's everyday life and things that aren't normally funny that kind of New Zealanders find humour in. So the kind of examples in the film are things like so Viago's female victim, for example. Actually, the mechanics of how do you actually feed in a way, and then what happens when you get it wrong, and so there's a whole sort of quite amusing scene of him feeding, and then that, as we talked about before, the whole kind of argument about the washing up and how that escalates. And then, the kind of more practical stuff of, well, if vampires can't see themselves in mirrors, then how do they get ready? And they get ready, they judge each other and they draw little pictures of each other to so it's, that's kind of, the mundane problems of being a vampire is what makes What We Do in the Shadow, the film, funny. And I think my worry was that in going to television, and going to America, because the kind of values of American media comedy are much bigger, much broader, much more kind of hyperbolic, aren't they? Is that wouldn't be where the comedy comes from anymore. But what's lovely about it is actually that's still where the comedy comes from, and actually the whole the juxtaposition of the language and the violence and the visual effects balances so well, because Dan, as you talked about before, the problems that the vampires are solving in What We Do in the Shadows is, how do I get into places? How do I kind of solve the problem of a friend of mine being in the kind of in animal control because they get caught when they're a bat,
someone stole my hat.
There's still really mundane problems then that's where the comedy's generated, isn't it? So it's nice to see that is kind of translated, and that despite the freedom to have quite grown up content in terms of taboo content, is it still retains a really charming kind of heart, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that was what leads FX to be the right place for it, because if it was on a channel that's a bit more sort of gung-ho with its comedy, so if it was on Fox, for example, who did Scream Queens and things like that, it would have to be bigger and shinier, and they couldn't laugh or get the laughs out of I've lost my hat, the episode I've lost my hat. They'd have to make the situations, like you said, more just it would have pushed it away from what it was, I think, whereas I think FX gave it the room to be, well, you can keep that contained almost smallness whilst having quite a bit of money and I think that also kind of comes back to just again the kind of the choices in the casting, because the original film was largely improvised. They didn't have kind of Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement had a script, but they didn't share it with the actors, so a lot of that stuff is is kind of riffed and
a very short script as well.
Exactly. But of course, TV and American television, even on FX, can't work like that. So
because they've got the schedules.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the fact they've got these, 4 actors, as the vampires, in particular, who, well, at least three. Obviously, you're talking about the guy who plays Colin Robinson, not being as familiar with his work, but the other three having quite, substantial comedic, kind of back catalogues.
Certainly in this
in this country, absolutely. Maybe not so much.
And I think that mitigates against the tone, because the British sense of humour is closer to the New Zealand. And I think that those, even though that, we talked about the ethnic spread, but all those three actors are British-based actors, even if they're also half Greek or whatever. And they come from British comedy, and I think that. I mean, I always assumed that the BBC had some involvement in it, because it looks so much like a British comedy show, but I guess they have no production involvement at all. They just broadcast it.
I think they've got distribution.
Yeah,
rights
they just
here.
got distribution rights. Yeah,
Right.
And I would assume that's because of the cast.
Yeah,
right.
With such a British-based cast, it makes sense to make that link.
Yeah.
Although it fits in with their other programming.
Although it's interesting that the Channel 4 E4 didn't snap it up because of
I thought that too.
Yeah.
Well, because they do Matt Berry's other stuff, most of his other stuff, and also Natasha Dimitriou's stuff as well.
And Phone Jacker as well. So they've
of
got
course, all of
them.
them.
But I think it's that sense of that they've all now, somehow more status in working in America, that the BBC went, okay,
go to the BBC now.
Which, to be fair, and I love the BBC, but it is what they've always done, isn't it? It's we'll wait for comedians to get really cool on some other channel, and then we'll steal
and then we'll snap them up.
as far back as the young ones.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
although, the BBC getting the distribution rights for it for season 2 and the start of lockdown was just like, oh, we'll watch that. And me and Owen had to, we kept having to say, right, we'll watch 2 tonight and then we'll save some, because otherwise we'd have just panelled it in 2 nights. She's like, no, we'll watch 2, and then if we want to stay up and watch more TV, well then we'll watch something else.
I think I always watched 4 or 5 episodes at a sitting.
Yeah, I think there was one night where we watched 2 and I was like, oh, go on.
Well, I'd just like to speak to your point about the freedom with the freedom that FX gave them with regards to the violence and the swearing and all that. I would say, for the benefit of listeners who've not seen the show, it doesn't feel that violent. No. Although it obviously is. There are stakings and things like that in it that you expect in a vampire show. There is blood and whatever. And I think part of the reason why it doesn't hit so much apart from that it's a comedy is that because of the aesthetic of the docusoap. It all has this appearance of spontaneity. So when Matt Berry gets in a fit of pique and goes, bat! It turns into a bat. The camera is not expecting him to do that. Yeah. So they don't show him do it. He's just suddenly off camera and they spin round and you see a bat flying away. And the same is with regard to lots of the kind of violent acts. And also the swearing, it doesn't have that director aesthetic that kind of might emphasise any of these elements. It just kind of feels quite light and natural. And I should say as well, in terms of continuing the tone from the movie to the series, not only is it created by Jermaine Clement, but he directs some episodes, and so does Taika Waititi. But there's obviously kind of a large writer's room with a very purposeful set of scripts, and we talked about the fact that Guillermo, sorry, my crap Spanish pronunciation, Guillermo's arc kind of feels really purposeful, and I think that extends across the show. But at the same time, it generally feels quite spontaneous as well. I think it's a great balance that they've got between those things. So before we start talking about like specific moments or characters that we like that might contain spoilers, is there anything else we'd like to just broadly discuss about the show? Oh, I've got one. Sorry, I was going to say it then. I forgot. Just like following on from that point, the use of the docu-soap convention is really interesting, although it is one of my only kind of minor criticisms of the show. I was talking to Stella and Ian about this last week when we were talking about Paranormal Activity and the difference between being very careful in setting up your exact reasons for taking a found footage approach, which Paranormal Activity does, and which What We Do in the Shadows, the film, does, because it kind of has a title card at the start that says, every year there is this vampire convention, and we're going to document the convention. So we've been following some vampires around for 6 months beforehand. You know, there's a very specific thing like that. And there's loads of great moments in the film where other characters react to the camera crew. What's that camera crew doing here? You know, it's not just the main characters who interact with the camera. It's everyone, and it kind of carries that all the way through. The series, much like Paranormal Activity 2, incidentally, kind of establishes, kind of throws away that logic and just goes, well, they're filming it, but we won't address it too much. Just whatever. And as a result, they don't do the same kind of jokes in the show a lot of the time. Certainly for the first series, they kind of only really acknowledge the camera crew in like every second or third episode, whereas towards the end of the second series I felt that they would bring in it much more. I don't really mind because it still works, the characters still work, and it's still hugely funny, but I really did appreciate that they kind of set up this very firm documentary format for the film, which they then kind of went kind of smushy on with the series. Kirsty, I think you want to feed in on this.
Well, I think that partly that the reason for that is probably to do with trends in television, American television sitcom, though, right? Because, you know, if you look at Modern Family and you look at The Office, and others as well, that they've often taken that approach of this is documentary, but we're not really going to explain what the documentary is, or we're not going to bring in the crew as characters. We're just going to cut to interviews, and we're going to have occasional kind of fourth wall breaks to this, you know, kind of knowing camera. So I think like within the film, because of it's setting up that as a thing for this particular universe, and even the film uses the New Zealand Documentary Board logo. And I think for a film viewer, it's much more important, isn't it, to locate us in a space that we kind of go, okay, this is, you know, I'm not watching that omniscient observer, you know, this is kind of found footage, or this is a documentary crew, and this is how I understand I'm seeing the film. That because of things like The Office and whatever, American television comedy doesn't feel the need to do that as consistently. And I'm going to be honest, it annoys the crap out of me when like it seems to be really inconsistently used. Not just in this, but across the board. I think there are a few shows that have started to do that now, which is they set up that, we're going to use that documentary kind of format, and then don't really follow it through completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bit which threw me was in the animal control episode, where suddenly there's an interview with the woman who drives the van that picks up animals. And I'm like, how did they even get there? Why are they talking to her? Who does she think they are? But the scene only lasts for 20 seconds, and then it just moves on. So, you know, but it's funny and charming. So, you know, and it's... There's also on the slightly the other side of that barrier containing those kind of shows is like the thick of it, where it's kind of filmed as if it's a docu-soap but doesn't say it is.
No.
So the characters never acknowledge the camera, but at the same time it has that freestyle to it, and it just makes it kind of feel more alive and more relatable. So I think what they do in this show you get immediately, and it helps you get into it. But I suppose the only reason I brought it up really was because I loved so much that they were so specific about setting up the parameters of the documentary in the film, and then they didn't do that in the series. But it would be harder to keep it up over the series anyway. And as Ian said last week when we were talking about this, and he mentioned The Office, he said, when are they actually going to release the docu-soap series that The Office is supposed to be about the making of? So... You know, it ran for 10 seasons, so So no, there's got to be limits. But yeah, so that's my only real criticism, apart from the fact that I felt like it didn't really get going for the first kind of episode and a half. Are there any other kind of criticisms in a non-spoilery way that we feel like we should bring up, even however reluctantly, even though we love the show?
No,
Go ahead, Kirsty.
Okay. It's a couple of, because the two sort of linked things. One is that with the it's difficult because I really love the film and I really love the TV show, so I'm going to be a critical fan. With the exception of Jackie and the character who's probably best described as the Beast in the film, there aren't that many female characters except for kind of victims, and it's all very kind of male dominated. And I'm kind of really glad that in the TV show they went, okay, well that's a problem, so we'll kind of bring Nadia in, but then she's still one of four. And the kind of other female characters that we meet, like Jenna, for example, are kind of very secondary. So I do think on the whole it has a problem with kind of female representation, which could be better, I think.
Could be better addressed. For sure.
I think no more so than a lot of comedy.
I don't think it's a specific problem. It's just
it's not really a knock against it. And in fact, that in context, I think that's convention of the token female. Sadly, is a thing that's happened across comedies. And I hope we're moving beyond it. I mean, I've noticed in recent years, you always used to get that on panel shows.
Oh yeah,
didn't you? You'd always have 3 guys and 1 woman. But now it's much more likely to be an even. Yeah,
well,
spread.
the BBC have a thing, don't they, where they say it can't be anymore. They can't do that anymore. But anyway, the other thing, it's kind of slightly related, is to do with so if you're like me and you're familiar with vampire kind of culture, in terms of media cultures and stuff, is that particularly the Anne Rice variety comes with an awful lot of kind of homoerotic subtext in it.
Oh yes.
Which the film and the television television show both play with, but I would so in the film there's Deacon does an erotic dance, which is very funny because it's not a particularly erotic dance. Well, it might be, but I didn't find it an erotic dance.
Not for me.
For Viago and for Vladislav, which is lovely. And then there's a scene, I can't remember, I think it's in season 2, where both Nandor and Laszlo and they end up with an appendage engorgement, which they agree to help each other out with.
Mutual assistance
in those.
Yes.
But the thing is that whilst those two moments kind of tip their hat at that kind of homoerotic subtext, I suppose, of vampire. Some elements of vampire literature and vampire, kind of media. It's used for kind of comedy. I'm not sure that's necessarily that helpful from a kind of queer representation perspective, because none of the characters are, kind of identify as queer. Do they?
But
go on.
It's on a spectrum of kind of gay representation in vampire literature. I mean, I think, the sort of bisexual vampire is quite common, but I think it's far more common for it to be the female one.
Because it starts playing into a male gaze, though, isn't it?
So it's nice that they're kind of avoiding that, but at the same time, and also I would say it is a comedy, so hopefully anything it does is going to be for comedic effect. But I don't know. I would give it time, hopefully, because I think that the kind of initially silly comic situations that are set up with all the characters, like with Guillermo specifically, over time develop into something that's quite affecting in a non-comedic way, and I think hopefully you could do something like that with characters like Laszlo and Nandor.
I'm not convinced that they will necessarily, but I think Only because
think-
Laszlo and Nadia are so. I mean, that's what there's a whole bit, isn't there, in one of the early episodes where it's with the Duke. Did the Duke arrive? Is it Duke or the Baron?
Yeah.
And that is
Yeah,
the kind of
the-
intercut between, you know, kind of Nadia saying, "Oh, this will be awkward because we had a, you know,
Yeah.
we
a
had a
thing,"
thing,
and
yeah,
then
and
Laszlo
then
also saying, "Oh yeah, we had a thing."
yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose there are kind of, but it's just, I suppose that the use of those things to kind of generate comedy is still, you know, it's about context, isn't it? And I'm not sure we're necessarily there yet. That where these things can be funny without just seeming a little bit kind of reductive and a little bit
Bit crass,
Yeah.
maybe.
yeah.
Fair point. You got anything, Stella, that you'd like to mention to knock about the show, or is it just all great?
It's all very, very good.
Which is completely valid. Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we best go into our spoiler section now. Then just talk about things that we love specifically that the listener might not want to have spoiled. So skip to the end, folks.
Yes.
If you haven't seen it yet, we'll go away and watch the show. Honestly, we haven't convinced you by now.
Yeah.
So I asked you for kind of specific characters or moments or lines that you might want to mention. So I'll start off with one. There's my favourite silly line that's just, it's not especially remarkable, but it's stuck in my head for some reason. It's Nadia's, "Piss this! You are welcome to his Siemens." Which is in the kind of Witches Coven episode where Laszlo and Nandor get kidnapped by a coven of witches who need to drain their semen for their own use. And at first, Nadia kind of is trying to rescue them, but then realises that Laszlo and Nandor have had a sexual relationship in the past.
Yeah.
And this is quite a late season 2 episode, isn't it? So I think
It's the
that
second
maybe,
to last, is it? Or the
yeah, I
very
think so.
last?
So
I can't remember.
it's not the very last because that's the
That's
Grand
the-
Guignol Vampire Theatre
Yeah.
one, I think. But so maybe this is the fracturing in the Nadia Laszlo relationship at this point. But I just love. I feel like there's certain lines which just feel like that they were just spontaneously improvised,
Yeah.
and that's one of them because again it just sounds like Natasha Dimitrio's mum to me.
I think her delivery
Yeah.
throughout it, whenever she's really exasperated, the way she delivers stuff is, like you said, it just feels very, very natural. So the episode with the hat, when he goes to get his hat back from the guy in the club,
Simon the Devious.
Simon the Devious. And I don't know how many times in that episode that she must say that effing hat, and just like she's just like that fucking hat all the time, and just the way she delivers it every single time with that look at the camera, I love it. I love her.
Yeah,
in fact,
no.
I want to be Nadia
Me
when
too.
I grow up.
Me too.
She is
She is
fantastic.
an icon, I think.
She is.
And my
Yeah,
teenage goth girl self just wants to be her.
Yeah. 16-year-old me is
Yeah.
screaming.
No, she's brilliant, and she's the only one who I think, even though we talked about the fact that they all think they're cool, but they're not. And in fact, I'll quote another podcast, NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, when they were reviewing this show. They said basically you can sum it up in 3 words: vampires as dweebs. and that's kind of what they are. But at the same time, Nadia somehow is sort of cool, even though she's kind of pathetic and an idiot. You know, she can't pronounce the word Jeff. That wonderful storyline about her trying to reconnect with her reincarnated lost love, but she can't say Jeff because it's not an Eastern European enough sounding word, and she calls him Jesk. The things like that, you know, so great, and they just play on so many little ideas.
Yeah.
So wonderfully well. And what would you like to say, Kirsty? About
So there's one line, and I think it's somewhere in the first couple of episodes, not sure where, but then again it's a Nadia one, where she says this. I had to find it just so that I can read it without just cracking up, because I probably will. She says, and I don't know what the context for this is off the top of my head, we would have nun-free zones with a sign that says, no nuns, no nuns, none. Honestly, I love a good bit of wordplay, and that's just marvelous.
Yeah.
And her delivery is fantastic. So yeah, and I've actually seen you can get a sign. People have got done signs that say no, nuns, no nuns, none.
Oh, fantastic!
Oh, brilliant.
That's what I should have asked for my birthday. Owen's been asking me, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Should have been that."
Oh dear, sorry.
Oh dear.
How about you, Dan?
Too late. What other things do I love that I just wanted to mention apart from everything? So, boo. Have I said all my stuff? I think I have. What an idiot.
Okay, so we just talk about.
Should we talk about the trial?
Yeah, should we talk about the trial then?
Yes, yeah, we all want to go there, don't we? So, is the Vampire Council?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes,
Yeah. So this is season 1, episode
Season
7.
I had it
It's
written
quite
down.
late
episode
in
7,
season
I think
1,
it's-
yeah. They're
it's
10
1.7.
episodes each, aren't
Yeah.
they, the series?
And it
Yes,
is
1/7.
It is directed by Taika Waititi as well, so this is kind of
Yeah.
significant episode. So explain what happens in the episode just very quickly.
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, earlier in the series, I can't remember why. What did they do? They've done something to attract the wrath of the local vampire council.
Yeah. So I think it's a global vampire council, but
Oh, is it the global?
yeah.
Well, yes.
So
I guess it is.
they go. It's because they accidentally kill the Baron, don't they? They take him
Oh,
out.
yes.
Guillermo
and-
does it, doesn't he? Does he
Yeah.
open a curtain or something?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
By the way,
Guillermo. Yeah.
The Baron is the ancient vampire,
Yes.
played rather wonderfully
Yes.
by Doug Jones.
Absolutely.
That
But they go out and
extraordinary looking actor.
get him trashed, don't they?
Yeah.
They drink drug blood,
Yes.
and they all have a lovely evening. And they do talk about the idea. I think they've previously talked about the idea that he needs to not be around anymore. But
Yeah.
I think they all have such a lovely evening that they decide that they're not going to do that. And then
Yeah,
Guillermo,
but he has pizza, doesn't
Yeah.
he? He decides that he wants to eat human
Yeah.
food, so
Yeah.
he has some pizza and then
Yeah.
throws it up immediately.
yeah. So Guillermo, I think when they're at home, accidentally either opens the door or opens the curtain.
Something like that.
And,
Yes, yeah, he's
yeah.
just coming in.
It's just a shaft
Yeah,
of light
yeah.
and then...
And so
They're having that typical kind of wandering home at dawn, kind
Yeah.
of having had a night out kind of moment.
Yeah.
They've just got home just before the sun started to come up, and they're just standing there talking, and then Guillermo comes in, and the daylight comes in, and the Baron is just
Yes.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this episode, after the consequences of this event catch up with them, and they are summoned before the global vampire council who put them on trial. And just the process that they go to when they initially come to meet the council, you think it's basically Dave Bautista and this other vampire.
yeah,
And
Garrett.
Oh god! But it's not those. That they're just like the waiting
Yeah.
room or
Mhm.
the anteroom to the council chamber, and then they go into the council chamber. And I have to say, this was a point at which I love the show, but I was still missing the characters from the movie. I
Yeah.
think a remarkable thing about that movie is that it's quite short. It's an hour and 20 minutes or something, but you get to really feel for those characters, and I did miss their presence in the series up to this point, even though I could see that Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi were not far away behind the camera. But then I got a nice surprise. And it was one of many nice
surprises.
in
Indeed.
this scene.
Indeed.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So the council. This is, I mean, again, we're obviously in spoiler territory. I think what's interesting is obviously that we have the return of those characters from the film. Viago, Vladislav, and Deacon. Although Nick the vampire is missing, and if anybody's wondering about what happened to Peter, watch the film. Is that how? Like, if that's the global council of vampires, how did those three idiots get to
That's
be
just
in
politics,
such-
isn't it, mate?
get to be in such positions of power? Because that's the thing that doesn't really tally for me.
I don't know. I think it just reflects contemporary politics. How do any
Well,
idiots get in positions of power?
Okay, how did those three lovely idiots then get?
Oh yeah, and they wouldn't want the
No,
power.
no.
I imagine they're quite
Yeah,
uncomfortable on the
yeah.
council, to be honest.
But I think maybe Viago is just very good at kind of keeping the peace between people.
Yeah.
As, you know, as he was in the flat, and he's just been very diplomatic. And in fact, in this scene, he's the nice, approachable council member who introduces everybody. In his very kind of typically meek, gentle style. But then there are a number of other surprises.
Yes. Can we before we get to those, we just talk about their actual introduction though, because the council are in white silk, kind of robes, and they do this, very dramatic, almost, Suspiria-esque kind of dance number to welcome the accused into the trial. And in the middle of it all, we see Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement and the guy who plays Deacon, whose name escapes me, apologies to that person, doing versions of Deacon's erotic dance. It's the same arm movement they're doing. Yeah. As they so you sort of spot them amongst this kind of much more serious group of dancers.
I do remember seeing Jermaine Clement and just thinking, is that Jermaine Clement?
Mm-hmm.
Just from his face, because you just got brief glimpse.
We kept pausing it. We kept pausing it, going, what? To figure out who.
No, they're doing that weird kind
was.
of, snaky arm movement that Deacon does as part of his erotic dance, which I just think is that sort of brilliant kind of nod about their, or nod towards their kind of imminent reveal.
And I would say as well, to the point that how did these three dweebs get on the global council? It's not like the other members of the council are that impressive, except in terms of who they are, which is hugely impressive.
Huge, yeah.
But so,
do we need to
take it away?
Do we need to go
Kirsty,
through?
go for it.
Yeah, go
for
it.
the first one. Who's the first one?
I think that just before we start, I think the way that this works is if if you're kind of up with vampires and stuff and actors who played vampires, is that the next sort of couple of minutes are just an absolute joy of being reminded of different and even the ones who aren't there are referenced.
Yeah, they still say, don't they?
The first one is Tilda Swinton, who is a genius idea anyway, because who wouldn't believe that she's not an actual vampire? But this is Tilda Swinton she
appears under her own name.
Yes. But they all do,
use their own names.
And I have a thing to say about that. So, but Tilda Swinton as her character, she looks like her character from Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive, which I love.
Yeah,
it's a lovely film.
It is beautiful.
I haven't seen
but I think what's interesting is the fact that they all appear, the ones we're going to talk about, all appear under their own names. I wonder if it's a little bit of an allusion back to Max Schreck and the whole Shadow of a Vampire thing.
Oh, okay.
Because there was one of the rumours that was kind of floating around the production of Nosferatu back in 1921, 22, was that Max Schreck, who played, Count Orlok, was actually a vampire. And of course, that's the kind of the conceit of Shadow of a Vampire.
Elias Mahaji's film Shadow of a Vampire from 2001. Sorry if I've just pronounced his name terribly, but yeah.
But yeah, so I just wonder, it's kind of interesting that they're not their characters, they are the actors who played vampires on screen, which, kind of, if you're a film geek like me, you're going to go, oh, okay.
But I love the madness of the fact that they're sort of appearing as their characters, but also under their own names.
Yes.
So your brain just can't quite compute it.
Yeah.
So who have we got next? Who's the next one after Tilda?
Tilda.
So we've then got Evan.
Evan, Evan.
Bizarrely... it's Evan Rachel Wood from the Westworld.
Yes, but she
TV
is
series.
Stella will
but
know.
What's her vampire connection?
Stella?
Sorry?
Was she not?
Stella?
Is that not from Buffy?
No, Stella. She's sorry. Evan Rachel Wood is in the first couple of seasons of True Blood.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, True Blood.
Oh,
God.
Okay.
So
I'm tired.
Yeah.
First couple of seasons of True Blood.
Yeah.
And anything that references True Blood, I get very excited about and start screeching about it. So anybody's in the room and they don't care at all.
Right.
Yeah. So Evan Rachel Wood from True Blood, and then who else is there?
and then we've somebody Skyping in.
It's Wesley Snipes.
In the daylight. Cause...
In the day.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, the daywalker. He's always showing up.
Yeah. And his connection's not great, so he keeps dropping in and out, and they're like, oh, just ignore him.
This is very, very late 90s, early 2000s, which is also perfect as well.
Yeah.
And then, Dan?
Well, I can remember my other favourite one of the council, but it's not a famous name. Is there another famous name?
There is.
Okay, you'll have to refresh my memory, Kirsty.
So the last one is Paul Rubens.
Oh,
Paul
of course,
Rubens.
Yeah.
Oh no, there's two more. So Paul Rubens, who was, is it the Buffy film?
Yeah,
he's
in
Buffy film. That's what I was getting wrong.
Rutger's sidekick.
Yeah, and then there's Danny. What's his name?
Trejo.
Yeah, Danny Trejo.
Yes.
He was one of the vampires from Dusk Till Dawn, wasn't he?
From Dusk Till Dawn,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's
I
it.
hadn't twigged.
Yeah.
I recognise them all, but
Yeah.
apart from Rubens, I don't think I kind of realised they all
play
roles.
vampires.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the ones that are referenced but aren't so they first asked about where's Rob?
Where's Rob?
Yeah,
where's
Robert?
Robert?
Behind him.
Yeah, and then
So
there's
that's-
Tom and Brad.
Yeah, Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson, and then Tom and Brad couldn't make it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
It's just lovely.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely nod, but and a kind of really affectionate nod as well. I think.
Yes.
He wants to
Yeah,
put it behind him.
yeah.
God, it's
And then also I think kind of, although she's not part of the council, because the herald of the council is Kristen Schaal, who appeared in Flight of the Conchords, which of course was occasionally directed by, but always starring, directed by Taika Waititi, starring Jermaine Clement. And Rhys Darby as well. So. Yeah.
Is Rhys Darby the other one from Flight of the Conchords?
No, so the other one...
He's not,
no.
is it?
No.
The double act is Jermaine Clement, somebody else.
Yeah, and
I've never seen it.
Brett,
so.
oh my God, I've forgotten his name. So I'm a massive fan, so this is really terrible. Brett and Jermaine. It's Brett and Jermaine. You should see it. It's really funny.
Right. Yeah, wonderful. And to be fair, I was having a go at the BBC earlier for waiting for comedians to come along and then nicking them.
Yeah.
It was the BBC who gave Flight of the Conchords their first break on the radio.
Yeah.
So,
true.
Yeah, and then it was
All
HBO
right, we'll let them off then.
who did the TV show. So.
Sorry, what was
It
that?
was their TV show was on HBO.
Oh, right, okay. Right. Yes, that's right, of course. Shall I tell you who my favourite member of the Vampire Council is, though? It is the member we've not mentioned so far, when they all kind of show their fangs to declare their intent to punish our heroes. There's a whip pan over to a Vampire Council member who's a little baby.
Oh, it's the baby vampire.
Because that ties, because earlier in the episode, the Nadia and Laszlo were talking about what they could have done to get them in trouble.
Yeah.
And one of the anecdotes is that Laszlo turned a baby into a vampire because he was bored.
Yeah.
Of course he did.
Then it kind of called back to when the Dave Bautista character says that he's in trouble with the council because somebody framed him for turning the baby into a vampire.
So that's
if I find that guy.
Yeah. So that's like the third. That's the payoff, isn't it? Is the baby?
Yeah.
That's
fantastic.
Although obviously a baby vampire would be terrible, as Breaking Dawn Part 2 demonstrates.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly looks terrible.
It looks terrible. I don't know. Is it as bad as the zombie baby in the Dawn of the Dead remake? That's pretty bad as well.
Yeah.
Nobody needs that in their life.
No.
So
Is that given birth to?
Yeah. Well, she
gosh,
is a very pregnant woman, and she turns whilst pregnant, and then obviously gets put down. But then a bump is still moving, so she's a zombie. She turns into a zombie, so they just strap her down and she thrashes around and she gives birth, and it's this really bad zombie baby prosthetic. And I'm watching it going, they're not going to show that. They are going to show that. All right then. Okay. But yeah, the vampire baby is probably better than a really unpleasant zombie baby.
So we're on a continuum of gradually
unpleasant babies.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, unpleasant babies. So there's your own, and then zombie babies.
That's fantastic. So it sounds like the Vampire Council is sort of our favourite bit of what we do in the Shadows.
I think so.
Um,
Because they get
mean,
saved from their punishment at the end,
Yeah.
because they get put in the sunshine trap, don't they? Like
Yes.
just like in Interview with the Vampire. And then they
Yes.
get saved. Is it Guillermo's just got an umbrella?
No, I
Over
think
the
it's
top.
Colin,
Well, it's-
Colin Robinson.
It's
Colin
Colin
Robinson.
Robinson,
Yeah.
because what
Oh,
we've
yeah.
not mentioned is that Colin Robinson is part of the Vampire Council as well. He's actually, and they're like, we didn't know you're on the council, and he says, I never mentioned it, or something like that.
But yeah, they're stuck in the
Yeah.
pit, aren't they? Waiting for the sun to come over, and then he just pops up over the top. Hello, and it's all right. But yeah, I really enjoyed that nod to Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I have to think as well that it's maybe the other thing to just talk about briefly is the kind of the other guest stars, because obviously that episode has this whole big raft of guest stars.
Yeah.
And yet,
I feel like the regular appearance of surprising guest
Yeah.
stars is something I
Yes.
quickly learned to look
Yeah,
forward
yeah,
to.
yeah.
Um,
So there's, and I think some of them are like more kind of knowing guest stars, whereas like we've talked about, kind of Beanie before in this
Mm.
podcast.
Yes.
That
Beanie
she
Feldstein,
kind of,
yes.
I wouldn't necessarily, because she's a reoccurring character, I think 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah.
In the first
Yeah.
series, yeah. She's disappeared in the second
yeah.
series because Beanie had better
things to do.
do.
Absolutely. But we get things like I loved. So I think it's the first episode of season 2 has both Haley Joel Osment and Benedict
It's-
Wong, or is it
Benedict Wong, yeah.
Yes, they're both. I think
I
it's the
love
second
him.
Episode,
Okay,
but
second,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're both great. Benedict Wong plays the necromancer,
It's just brilliant.
the kind of rubbish
Yeah.
Yorkshire necromancer, and and Haley Joel Osment, who I didn't recognise at all, because I've not seen him since he was a child actor,
Yeah.
but obviously his name came up in the credits. He plays the hilarious character called Topher,
Yeah.
who is. I think he's Nando's kind of replacement familiar, isn't he?
Oh, no,
yeah.
he's
sorry.
Nadia and.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
That's familiar.
And Guillermo kind of always feels a little bit
Yeah.
put out because they love him and think he's so great,
Yeah.
Topher.
Doesn't he turn into a zombie?
Yeah.
Essentially,
he's killed and turned into...
He's brought back.
Well,
isn't
he's
he?
killed and then they get Benedict Wong's necromancer to bring him back and he does a bad
But he's
job.
really shoddy, yeah.
Yeah. And he just runs around going, Topher! And he's so fantastic. Gee. Yeah, I mean, I think the council counts as like the highest moment because of that concentration of like special bits in it which feel like direct gifts to us, I think, and audience members like us, because we know who those people are and
Yeah.
everything. But
But
there's so much during the rest of
Yeah.
the series that's so great, and and so many other guest stars. Mark Hamill turns
Yeah.
up, and when the Witches Covenant arrived, I actually found myself kind of surprised that I didn't recognise any guest stars in there. But I think maybe
Yeah, I think-
the main witch was a star who is just out of my
yeah,
orbit.
I want to say it's the main one is Lucy Speed, but I'm not sure if it is. Not Lucy Speed. That's wrong entirely. I'm just going to find out who it is now. Actually, in the Witches episode, I don't know why. I mean, Lucy Speed is not an actor I've been aware of for a while. So just I don't know where that.
She the British one.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Lucy Punch. There we go.
Oh,
There
that's
we go.
right,
Lucy
yeah,
Punch.
yeah.
Who of course you might remember from Hot Fuzz and other things as well.
Mm.
Oh, is she in Hot
yeah.
Fuzz? Okay,
Yeah.
I've only watched that recently. Who did she play in that?
In Hot Fuzz, she is. Hold on, no, I've got to go back. She's done quite a lot of stuff. She was in the. Maybe she's not. Anyway, so listeners can Google Lucy Punch. I thought I
I
was
shall
sworn.
do
Oh no,
that.
she is. She's Eve Draper in Hot Fuzz. She was also in St. Trinians. She's been in lots of stuff recently. I think she was in the Netflix A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Okay. I think maybe Eve Draper is the character who gets murdered.
Yes.
who
Yeah,
plays
she's Juliet.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
yeah. So and
But
she's
the-
very funny, and she was one of the ugly
Yeah.
sisters in the Into the Woods films, which I'm sure both of you've seen because that's totally up your street.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm a huge fan.
Stephen Sondheim and
16
yeah,
viewings
Disney.
so
yeah,
far.
I know. I went
But
to
do
see
have
that with
Disney
my
Plus,
yeah.
so it Could
I
happen.
want to see it with
Could
Sven,
happen.
who fell asleep promptly.
Good man.
Wow.
Anyway,
I've never been able to make it through.
no.
Sound
Don't
of music in my life, so it's
Oh,
not,
God,
not
no.
my scene.
No,
But,
no.
Oh well, but yeah. So
Anyway.
and I'd like to mention while we're on spoilers that we do get Jermaine Clement back at the end of the second series as well. It's not, unfortunately, it's not the whole gang
No.
back together, but you do get Vladislav.
Yes.
And that's kind of wonderful, guys. I think we're coming close to the end
Yeah.
of our episode. So, are there any other delights that we'd just like to mention, spoilery or not spoilery? Before we start
I
talking about-
just want to just very quickly talk about the fact that the television show and the film kind of exist now as part of a kind of extended, I don't want to say cinematic universe because it's not quite that, but there's certainly kind of a narrative franchise world that exists. So and I'm not sure why we haven't had it, but I've not been able to find it, unless maybe it's just sort of been hidden away somewhere. So they also spun off from the film a television show in New Zealand called Wellington Paranormal, which features officers Minogue and O'Leary, who are both in the film as the sort of, kind of very sort of salt of the earth, but very kind of matter of fact, but not terribly bright police officers. So Nick the vampire appears in that. So he's not part of the Vampire Council, but he is, and we find out that Nick the vampire's been working in a blood bank. Which is lovely. So there's that as well as part of the universe. And then, I don't know. It took them ages to do what we do with the Shadows from the point at which they had the idea. But I know that Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi have been developing a film that also fits in the universe, which is simply called, and again, this lovely wordplay, Werewolves.
Werewolves, nice.
So that's a treat, I'm sure, for the future, which obviously focuses on the werewolf, kind of faction, less vampires, more werewolves, but not swearwolves because
No,
that would just
we don't do that.
So that's one to look at for the future whenever that happens. I mean, it could be another 10 years. Who knows?
Yeah, wonderful. How about you, Stella?
And I would just like to mention, obviously, that in episode 6 of series 2, Laszlo ends up with his own bar, and it's basically identical to Merlot's bar in True Blood. And I think is there a point where there's some ditzy waitress as well, to sort of, as a nod to Suki Stackhouse.
Yeah.
But again, anything that references True Blood, even though I forgot before, is definitely my box of frogs.
Yeah.
With the council as well, I was reading about that, and they did ask Alexander Skarsgård, who plays Eric Northman, who I love so much. Like, I shouldn't love him as much as I do, but I can't. The heart wants what it wants. And he said yes, but he was in Australia and they just couldn't get him over to do it.
Oh no!
But he said yes.
Oh.
Because he's a wonderful human being.
Obviously.
He'll turn up.
I'm sure he'll rock up.
That would be a wonderful.
It'd be so good.
Yeah.
But and I guess the last thing that I would like to say, that if you've got this far, just watch it.
Yeah.
Watch it. I'm going to watch it again.
Yeah.
I need to watch it again. Cause I think you could probably hear on this that we've all just been laughing the whole time from remembering it. That you need to rewatch. I think it's definitely going to go into my my comfort horror box.
No, it's for me. It's
horror things that I want
there.
to watch when I want to feel nice.
No, I agree. I mean, it's there is such a thing as comfort horror, I suppose, and I'd put it in there, and I'd also just recommend it to anyone who's up for great comedy.
You don't even have to like horror, do you?
Yeah,
I have.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I have comedy fan friends who've not watched it, and I'm just kind of pestering them.
Yeah.
And I would so recommend it to anyone, really. It's fantastic. I don't think there's anything that's kind of off-putting about it. Even though we talked about it, the occasional violence and the sexual references and things like that, I think basically the whole world that they've created is just kind of sweet.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And even heartwarming. So,
Yeah.
what were you going to say, Kirsty?
Well, I was just thinking about the way in which that kind of sense of kind of comfort horror, which seems like completely kind of oxymoronic, really, sort of links to it. I'm sure there's probably a word in German for this, but I'm aware that in German there's the kind of concept of what's called, I think it's, forgive my pronunciation here because I'm learning, Krimmerkussen, which is a type of like crime drama that you watch sort of as comfort viewing. I mean, we get lots of this stuff anyway, but it just seems that there ought to be a similar kind of thing for for horror, which is
it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, it's, a horror that you watch, which isn't actually that scary, which is just delightful, and that you want to sit and drink tea and have blankets and eat chocolate too.
Yep.
That's this.
Yeah. That's fantastic, and and that's exactly the kind of thing I love. Okay, so guys, I think we might have covered at least a fraction of the reasons why we think what we do in the shadows is
Can I just interrupt? I think I've come up with the term.
All right.
Oh, go on.
Hygge horror.
All right.
Hygge
well,
horror?
you just created
Yeah,
that.
like after the Danish hygge, kind of comfortable coziness horror. Hygge horror.
Oh, that's wonderful.
There we go.
And
Sorry.
It's like horror that gives you a hug.
Yes.
There's a book chapter in there, Kirsty.
There is. I haven't got time to write it, but yeah, there is.
No, there is. If anyone wants to do that, that'd be great.
And we end on a coinage. So, a celebration of what we do in the shadows. That was great. So, listeners, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. I think we're all going to go and watch it again right now. So,
Indeed.
Wonderful, guys. So, just before we end, what recommendations have we got for this week? Kirsty?
Okay, so I've obviously been on holiday, so I've not been watching massive amounts, but I did manage to finally catch, and I know that it's a contentious film and lots of people didn't necessarily like it, but I want to recommend to you Jim Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die.
Okay.
Which is on
Not
Sky
seen that
Movies
yet.
at the moment, and I love Jim Jarmusch, as we've already talked about, and Jim Jarmusch's take on horror is lovely, and I think maybe the reason why people didn't rate it that highly is possibly people who were expecting a sort of zombie film and not a Jim Jarmusch film might have been a bit upset with it, but it's a very Jim Jarmusch zombie film. It is a zombie film which is probably Hygge horror in that it has the lowest amount of peril of a
Right.
It, people die, people become zombies, but none of it is particularly horrific. But it's
all right.
Yeah, but it's very charming, and it's quite meta at times. So there's a bit at the beginning where Bill Murray and Adam Driver, who are the two sort of leads. Tilda Swinton's also in it. Bill Murray and Adam Driver are the two police officers sort of in the middle of this small town where bad things start happening, and they are listening to a song on the radio which is called The Dead Don't Die, a kind of country song, and we've just heard it because it's just been the kind of accompaniment to the opening titles, and Bill Murray's character says to Adam Driver's character, "Oh, this sounds familiar," and Adam Driver basically comes back and says, "Yeah, it's because it's the theme tune." So there's a kind of meta element to it as well. Delightful.
Cool.
All right. I'm tragically late in even starting my Jim Jarmusch pilgrimage, which I've intended to go on since the mid-90s at least, and still never seen any of them. But I need to attend to that. How about you, Stella?
I've got a vampire-y recommendation, and I'm really worried that I've recommended it before, so if I have, you just have to cut it. It's a YouTube creation of Carmilla, of the very, 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 very old vampire text. And it's all set in a student dorm in America, so there's just on a webcam, so just one shot the whole time, so people come in and out of the dorm, and it's a retelling of the old Carmilla text, and it's really, really good.
J. Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla, one of the
and I think
Dracula, one of the very early.
And it did get
vampire
picked
texts.
up by a TV production company, as far as I'm aware, but I don't think anything's been done with it yet. But there's a series of it on YouTube.
Oh wow!
Okay.
So yeah, it's worth a look.
That sounds cool.
So it's just called Carmilla.
Carmilla, yeah.
I'll find that and put
Yeah.
a link in. So you haven't recommended that before,
Right, good.
so that's great. Okay. And my recommendation is going to be sticking with comedy. Seems appropriate. I've just noticed that Monty Python and the Holy Grail has appeared on Netflix.
Yes.
and now it's not horror at all. But on the other hand, it does have my favourite scene with the terrifying bunny rabbit,
Yes.
which tears the throats out of tons of crusaders, and it's ridiculously violent, and absolutely hilarious. And that's my favourite Monty Python film, and I haven't watched it for years, but that scene's always stuck with me. So I'd recommend that to anyone. And also the bit which is, he who approaches the bridge of death must answer me these questions 3. That's my other favourite thing in the movie. So, so that's my shout for this week. For the listeners' benefit, I'm seeing on the on the camera here that Stella and Kirsty both have visitors. It's almost as if people know that the podcast is nearly over. Okay.
I'm being shown notes with questions on.
Right. So, well, thank you, everybody. That was our What We Do in the Shadows episode. I think we had great fun.
Yes. Thank you.
Kirsty's getting attention from her cat right now. Thank you very much, Stella. Thank you very much, Kirsty. It's been an
Thanks,
incredible
Dan.
pleasure.
Thank you.
We'll be back in some form next week. We're not exactly sure what form it's going to take, but, watch this space. You know where we are by now. All right, you'll hear from us again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by Kirsty Warrow, T.D. Velasquez, and Stella Gaynor. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.